Okay, you got my
Loud and clear, looking good. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Marty. And thank you for the opportunity today. I'm always interested and willing to talk trash when anybody's willing to listen. So my name is Kevin Roach, and I serve as the general manager for ecomaine. I've been in the industry for over 30 years. I graduated from University of Buffalo in 1989. My first project was to put the city of Rochester's trash routes onto a geographic information system. We didn't have Google Maps back then, but that was my first entry into the solid waste industry. So 30 years later, here I am in Portland, Maine, enjoying a very fulfilling career in solid waste management. So for those of you who are not familiar with ecomaine, I think that our mission statement describes us best. ecomaine provides comprehensive long-term solid waste solutions in a safe, environmentally responsible, economically sound manner, and is a leader in raising public awareness of sustainable solid waste management strategies. This shot happens to be a shot of our annual open house, which is very popular. We draw about 1,500 people a year to that event. Unfortunately, this year, because of COVID-19, we weren't able to have the event, usually scheduled in September, but we are looking forward to having it next year. Our communities, we serve about 70 communities, which equals about 400,000 folks. We have 3 facilities and a program. We have a single sort recycling facility, a food waste recovery program, a waste to energy plant, and a landfill ash fill. Those are all owned and operated by ecomaine. We are very proud of our programs, and I think that this is what makes ecomaine somewhat unique, is our attention to public relations and outreach and education in our schools, in particular in our schools. We have tours and school presentations, school grants program, paid and earned media, advertising on television, social and digital media, fairs and events. And much of this now with COVID before us is offered virtually. So we haven't skipped a beat. It's just offered a little bit differently these days. These are our 70-member communities. So we go just over the border into New Hampshire with a couple of communities there, all the way up to Augusta in the Waterville area. Some of these folks bring us solid waste. Some of them bring us recyclables. Some of these communities bring both to our facilities. We subscribe wholeheartedly to the waste hierarchy that Jim had mentioned, which is reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, waste energy, and landfilling. This is in state statute, as well as guidance by the EPA. So something that was very near and dear to us, that all of our decisions are made with an eye on the waste hierarchy. One of the challenges, the biggest challenge that I see, is that landfilling remains dominant. It's been dominant for a very long time in our country, and we have made great strides to get off landfilling, but we still have a long way to go. But I see our biggest challenge in front of us is that landfilling remains dominant. Some, criticize me for making the landfill evil. The landfill is not evil. What I'm saying is we need to preserve our landfills so that the life of our landfills lasts for a very long time, just like our children. We want them to have a very fulfilling life, and we want these landfills to be around for a very long time. So they need the care, and we don't want to fill them up prematurely. The EPA shows us that landfills are one of the highest emitters of methane gases. And methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gas emissions that we need to be concerned with. And unfortunately, I think what's happening is we're becoming so dependent on landfills that we're becoming willing to transport our waste to faraway places. I'm seeing more and more waste that's generated in New England is being trucked either by a tractor trailer or by train to faraway places such as Ohio. This is a model I think that is not sustainable. It may work in the near term, but I don't think it'll work over the long term. And as Jim had mentioned, the reality in the state of Maine, which I think we're doing a little bit better than the rest of the country, is that 40% of our waste stream is still landfilled. Less than that, recycling is about 33%. So we still have a long way to go in meeting our goals of the waste hierarchy. And for those of you like myself who believe that the status quo is unacceptable, if we do nothing, the bottom line is that we will be pouring more and more money into our landfills. This is not where we want the resources. And there's really two types of dollars going into our landfills. There's the tipping fees that are going into our landfills, and there's resources that are valuable that are going into our landfill. So the reality of it is our hierarchy is indeed upside down, with landfilling really at the top, really being the dominant way of managing our waste. And if we want to flip that around and make the hierarchy right side up, we need to change the way we're doing business when it comes to solid waste management. In order to do that, we need the leadership, we need execution, and we need money. Just like any other game plan, whether you're in the NFL or you're playing baseball, you need all three to make this successful. So the idea that we've been advocating for is, in order to keep our landfills a reasonable size, we need to take those revenues that are entering our landfills and pour that revenue into the higher rungs of the waste hierarchy. It's the money that counts in order to make this change. It's not going to happen without influence and incentives. And those dollars going into the waste hierarchy are necessary in order to push practices up through the higher rungs of the waste hierarchy. For those of you who feel that life is often cyclical, over 30 years ago, we all remember the Mobro garbage that was trying to shift the waste to another geographic area. In this case, New York's waste was headed for North Carolina and then into the Gulf of Mexico, and eventually made its way back after spending 3 or 4 months out at sea. And the lesson there was, you've got to try something else. And in this case, it was try recycling. And to me, that was the last crisis that we really faced when it came to solid waste management. And I think we're at that turning point once again, because landfills are filling up. They're filling up at a very fast pace. The smaller landfills are closing, and the regional landfills are getting bigger. And we can't afford to continue to ship our waste to faraway places and expect to have a solid waste management strategy. Really, recycling, there's no other solid waste management strategy that has seen more success over the last 30 years than recycling has seen. Really, the diversion of recycling 30 years ago, none of us would have thought that we would have been able to achieve the rates of recycling that we're achieving over the last 10 to 20 years. Now, we haven't reached the goal of 50%, but we're not all that far off. We're in the 30s, and we're always striving to get to 50. And so I still think it's a possibility that we can reach those goals if we really have better policies to move us ahead. For our own communities at ecomaine, over the last 15 years, if we had landfilled all of those tons, the 500,000 tons of recyclables, into our very own landfill, that would have cost our communities about $36 million in tipping fees. Again, the idea is not to put the money in the landfill, but to put the money into the higher rungs of the hierarchy. So for the ecomaine communities, you can see, over the last 15 years where we've been with recovering recyclable materials. And when we instituted single sort recycling back in 2006, we saw a gradual, over about 10 years, we saw a gradual increase every single year in what we were able to recover from the waste stream. That plateaued in 2015 and has declined ever since then. So we're losing capacity in recycling infrastructure. We're losing capacity not only at our recycling facility, we're losing capacity at the curb in the collection infrastructure that has been set up to collect these materials. And that's going to be an ongoing concern if we continue this downward slide with the recovery of recyclable materials. Some of this is due to newspapers disappearing from the recycling stream. Some of this is due to the lightweighting of packaging. Regardless, we need to react to get that capacity back to where it was and continue the goal of reaching 50%. The last few years has been a real struggle for the recycling industry. I think we've all faced it. It's really not all that much different from when I started in the industry, when the value of the material was on average, about $15 a ton. And that's where we've been stuck at for the last couple of years. So, over the 20-year period, we really saw recycling accelerate to a level that was a model that a lot of people built infrastructure on. And unfortunately, with the China's national sword, and it's not all their fault, because that wasn't really a sustainable model going forward for forever. That became a problem, and that threw supply and demand out of balance, and it's been out of balance since. That said, we're still able to sell every single ton of material that comes into our facility, goes out to a market. Now, the value is sometimes below zero because we have to transport it, in some cases, to faraway places, but the material is still moving. So there is still some level of balance in the recycling market. We're just not seeing the value that we once saw back from about 2005 to 2017. And so this has forced the industry to change the model on how we support recycling programs. When we started these recycling programs 30 years ago, we put in the infrastructure, the collection infrastructure. Municipal governments spent extra to institute recycling and subsidized it for many, many years. And over time, the value of the commodities increased to a point where it was self-sustaining. But over the last few years, as I just mentioned, the value of the commodity has decreased so much that we've lost so much revenue that in order to sustain these recycling programs, we needed another source of revenue. So the industry has shifted from a commodities revenue standpoint to a combination, or really a focus on covering operating costs with tipping fees. So most of the industry now charges a much higher tipping fee, and some of you may be aware of this because you're faced with these higher tipping fees on recycling, and then a sharing of the revenue from the commodity. So it takes the risk out of the opportunity of processing recyclable materials. And this has worked for the industry, and I suspect that this will continue, even though many are still upset that they have to pay such a high tipping fee for recycling. However, there is hope. I feel very confident with my experience, my 30 years in the industry, that the markets are going to come around. We're seeing huge investments by the very largest paper mills, and they're converting these paper mills from your traditional paper making, such as newspaper and writing paper, pure paper and things like that, over to packaging. And their bet is that the consumer still prefers a fiber package over a plastic package in most circumstances, not all. The plastic trash bag is not going away anytime soon. That has properties that I think all of us enjoy. But in many applications, I think that the general public prefers a paper package over a plastic package. And that's why these investments are going to be made. And 20 mills have announced these investments, and they've been delayed here and there. But by and large, a lot of these projects are moving forward, some of them more slowly than we anticipated. And I believe that eventually we will be in a position where we will actually have a shortage of recyclable fiber to meet the demands of these mills that are coming online over the next few years. So this is promising news, I think, for the industry. We can't underestimate the value of outreach. So little is done with outreach, and we're left to rumors, and we're left to information that just isn't accurate. And so we need to spend more time, energy, and money on really educating our consumers, being as transparent as we possibly can, so that we can change behavior and improve things like contamination levels. We've all been dealing with contamination levels, and with proper education, those challenges, I think, can be reversed. We also found with COVID-19 that the solid waste industry is and always has been essential, both on the solid waste side. We can't allow our trash to get backed up in the home or at the business. And we can't allow our recycling programs to be suspended, because that is the start of the supply chain to make new products, such as packaging and other paper goods. So it's essential any way you look at it. Over the last 6 months, you can see on the red line here that we lost, when COVID started in March, we lost about 20% of our commercial solid waste stream. That was huge. We haven't seen that since the Great Recession. The Great Recession, we actually lost 30% of our commercial waste stream. This wasn't as bad as the Great Recession, and in fact has bounced back to some degree over the last 3 months. We're down on commercial waste about 5% compared to last year. Recycling and residential waste are both up greater than last year, between 5 and 10% over the last 6 months. So the waste stream has shifted from the commercial sector to the residential sector. And that has provided some challenges, particularly for the hauling industry. We have had, our pool cars have been electric for the last 6 years, and that has served us very well. We actually plug them into the waste energy plant, which is fueled by the trash that we collect from our member communities. I'm very excited to announce that we are finally moving toward electric trucks. We have purchased 2 electric haul trucks that will be powered. We will be plugging them into the waste energy facility, again, fueled by the waste that's delivered to the waste energy facility, and hauling that waste to the landfill. So this is something that we are really excited about. We hope to have those trucks in the spring. Waste to energy generates 10 times the amount of energy from each ton of waste when compared to trash decaying in the landfill. So waste to energy, in our case, makes a whole lot of sense, and we hope to expand this program, and that this will have huge benefits going forward. What this also does is it improves the marketing of the electricity for waste to energy facilities like ourselves. We're selling our power right now on average for 3 cents a kilowatt. We're going to actually improve that to 18 cents when applying using the application of using these electric trucks, using that energy ourselves in-house. So this really increases the value of the power that we're generating. It also provides a 75% fuel savings for our member communities. So we need to continue to look for ways to support the waste hierarchy and push practices up the waste hierarchy, as far up the hierarchy as we possibly can. I leave you with one thought that I hope that you will remember, because we need your support for better policies, both at the federal level and at the state level. And that is that we need solid waste practices that are less filling. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim and Marty.
Thank you, Kevin. And now we'd like to turn to Tony King to speak about solid waste management in the private sector. Tony?
While Tony's putting those slides up, keep those Q&A coming. We've got some really excellent questions in there. It's great to see those coming in. The floor is yours, Tony.
You're seeing my screen? Yeah. Thank you for the introduction and thanks for having me. This is a great program. My slides have a lot of words on them, so I'm not necessarily going to read through them since you're going to be provided with the presentation, but I wanted to point out this one, John and Doug Casella and their first trash truck in 1975. I have to move something around.
Slides look great, Tony. Nice and loud, if you would. We've had our share of audio problems this morning, so let's blast it out there.
Okay. Since then, we've expanded our operations from Vermont to New Hampshire, New York, Maine, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. We employ 2,500 people in our vertically integrated operations. And annually, we recover over 800,000 tons of recycling and over 450,000 tons of organics for beneficial use. Casella owns or operates diverse facilities across the state of Maine. In 2019, we employed 470 Mainers. We strive to be an employer of choice, to promote strong labor markets, and are a company where individuals have access to the training and opportunities that lead to career growth and economic security. We're always hiring great people. This is essential work, serving Maine communities and advancing environmental and economic sustainability. We operate 250 waste collection vehicles in Maine. In the last state waste generation and capacity report published in 2019, Maine reported generation of 1.4 million tons of waste. That's municipal solid waste, construction and demolition debris, and recycling. Of that, nearly half was handled on Casella trucks or transferred or recycled through Casella facilities. More than half of our Maine-based transfer stations are operated under municipal contract. We leverage our experience and partnerships to help municipalities reduce waste and cost. I'm always shocked at the numbers that you see on the slide here. The electronic waste just continues to come. Pine Tree Waste was among the first e-waste consolidators at the advent of Maine's e-waste program in the early 2000s. And we thought we'd get an initial slug of material and that the volume would diminish over time, but every year we collect just an enormous amount of TVs, computers, light bulbs, and batteries. Recycling is a capital-intensive business that's subject to volatile commodity markets and global economic forces. As we've seen in the past couple of years, recycling is not free. We're working with partners to rethink the business model of recycling to ensure the economic sustainability of this valued service, focusing specifically on new markets for glass, minimizing residue, cost share models, and modernizing antiquated deposit programs. Casella Recycling has pledged to market 100% of residential zero-sort recycling domestically versus export. While we do not ship directly to China, beginning in January 2021, China will no longer import any secondary fiber, and this is going to disrupt the entire market. While pricing continues to be depressed overall, movement is still steady. With China's new phase, we anticipate additional reductions in fiber pricing by the end of the year. Here's what the average Mainer can do to reduce the cost of waste management. Find ways to reduce and reuse, and then recycle better. Make sure you're putting only the right stuff in your bin. We've discovered that reducing inbound contamination to 5% or less would reduce the cost of recycling by as much as 30%. 2020 has been a great year for compost sales, largely driven by COVID-induced home gardeners. Strong compost markets are the most sustainable way to advance food waste recovery. Let's all keep buying locally and regionally produced compost. Biosolids land application, however, has been slowed by consumer concerns about PFAS, and a lack of compost capacity has resulted in higher rates of landfilling of biosolids. That's unfortunate, as biosolids agronomic beneficial use is an excellent practice for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and sequestering carbon. Our customers continue to need a holistic approach to resource management, one that integrates disposal solutions with their recycling solutions, particularly for materials that aren't yet recyclable. There are also times when the protection of human health and the environment necessitates the availability of quick and reliable disposal options. For all of these reasons, our solid waste landfill facilities remain important to our integrated infrastructure offering. We have systematically worked at our landfills to install gas collection equipment, improve gas collection efficiency, develop innovative cover and capping practices, and produce renewable energy. Low emission landfill investments have been the top driver of our emission reductions, and we are committed to further reductions. We aim to transform our landfill facilities into multi-use environmental and economic developments. Renewable natural gas generation is the next logical and exciting step in our operation of the state-owned landfill in Old Town. I really love this graphic as it totally captures our vision. To endure, recycling programs must be built on a solid foundation of environmental, economic, and social sustainability. The great promise of recycling is not that we can eliminate landfills, but that we can eliminate mining and deforestation. The stuff you buy has a large environmental footprint, and less than 5% of it comes from end-of-life collection, processing, and disposal. This means that simply moving discards from one bin to another is not enough. To tackle the other 95% of the environmental footprint, society has to design more of its stuff to be durable and recyclable with a high amount of recycled content. We need holistic recycling solutions designed to capture not only quantity, but quality. To establish a circular economy, producers have to design for recycling, consumers have to put the right stuff in the bin, Casella has to run a great sorting operation, we have to find the highest and the best markets, and the producers have to buy recycled content, and the cycle continues. We talked a lot about extended producer responsibility, or EPR, in the legislature over the last couple of years. We are generally supportive of the concept and the idea that producers should help pay for recycling, but it's important to get the details right, particularly in market creation. Single-stream curbside recycling remains the most efficient and effective way to recover basic recyclables from consumers. EPR has the potential to improve recycling by funding new infrastructure and encouraging design for recycling and reuse. But EPR must be carefully designed to enhance and supplement our existing infrastructure rather than compete against it. This slide has a lot of numbers on it, so let me just summarize. While the current main policy values incineration above landfilling, our state generation and capacity is such that landfilling is unavoidable. There are several regional or municipal landfills that you heard about earlier that have established market areas that take up a small portion of this stranded capacity. You will hear from Mr. Aronson that the coastal capacity was recently disrupted and PERC absorbed much of that bypass. But by PERC's own admission, with the depressed energy revenue, additional volume is no longer conducive to their economic model. In the last couple of years, the MRC member municipalities have broken from PERC, funded the coastal concept, and are now seeking disposal back at PERC. Some of these municipalities drive right past the state-owned landfill in Old Town to dispose at PERC under the auspices of incineration being more environmentally sound than putting their trash in a landfill. But is that really the case? The state-owned landfill in Old Town is highly engineered and constructed to federal and state standards with double liners for leachate collection, which have obviated any ground or surface water potential contamination. It has aggressive gas collection, treatment, and cover systems that reduce potential air emissions to the greatest extent practicable. So why shouldn't Maine municipalities be allowed to dispose of their trash at the Maine-owned landfill? Well, landfill and, let's be honest, Casella opponents like to hide behind Maine's solid waste hierarchy rather than answer that question directly. So let's talk about the hierarchy. Maine's hierarchy is decades old, and it's time to take a careful look at the greenhouse gas footprint of incinerators and landfills and update the waste hierarchy accordingly. We do a lot of investigation into our carbon footprint as a company, particularly the greenhouse gas emissions from our landfills. We were a founding partner of the EPA Climate Leaders Program in 2006, and in 2012 we received the EPA's Excellence in Greenhouse Gas Management Award, celebrating our achievement of a 45% reduction in total greenhouse gas emissions from 2005 to 2010. We have developed new climate targets and will make further emissions reduction investments over the coming decade. Well, most folks think that incineration or waste to energy is an improvement over landfill disposal because electricity is generated. They often don't consider the emission side of incineration. Incinerators generate their maximum BTUs through burning plastics and other fossil fuel-based consumer products in the waste mix. The generation of methane in landfills is a biogenic source of carbon decay. While incinerators reduce the volume of the MSW, their daily greenhouse gas emissions are not inconsiderable. The EPA has recognized that landfills with energy recovery are at least on par in the waste hierarchy with incinerators. In fact, calculations show that when our RNG project at the state-owned landfill is initiated next year, on a ton of waste to ton of waste basis, the landfill will emit only 41% of the tons of CO2 equivalent that incineration would. The power and the value of the hierarchy isn't as a static, unchanging list of isolated mandatory solutions. Its value comes when we view it as a spectrum of interconnected solutions, a system in transition, and guidelines toward continuous improvement. Policy outlines the goals, but industry innovates and implements. Our facilities and services cover all levels of this hierarchy, and the solutions at the top aren't just feel-good stories. We hold to the same high standards for safety, environmental protection, and profitability as any other part of the business. This is how we know they'll last, and that's true sustainability. That's all I have for now. I'm happy to answer any questions later. Thanks again for having me.
Tony, thank you for that presentation. And our next speaker is George Aronson to talk about this from the private consultancy aspect.
Okay, can you see my slide?
Yep, looks great.
Terrific. Okay, let's go. Okay, my name's George Aronson. I've worked with the MRC with the MRC community since 1989 in Maine. The MRC has chosen a new and different approach to waste management and recycling I'm going to talk about. It's a system in transition. Some might say it's a system on a roller coaster ride, and we don't know the outcome yet. So I'm going to tell you the context, the latest status, at least through Friday. And in the telling, I hope to raise some fundamental questions that the MRC story raises for the future of the solid waste industry, not only in Maine, but across the USA and beyond. So let's go. Okay, there's your patchwork quilt, Jim. That's what 115 communities that the MRC serves, it looks like right now, as Jim mentioned, was 187 until March 31st, 2018. And there was a split, but you're looking at communities from Dyer Brook in the north to Boothbay Harbor in the south, with the centroid just south of Bangor. And if you look very carefully, you can see a blue dot in the center, which is the town of Hamden, which is the location of the Coastal Hamden facility, which was sponsored by the MRC. The MRC bought the land and sponsored development. So let's talk about that. The owner is Coastal Resources of Maine, LLC, which is a private company. The site is off I-95. If you've been to Dyserts, you're not far away. It's right off the exit, in fact, right across from the Pine Tree landfill, so it has some distinguished neighbors. The MRC owns the site, is committed to send 102,513 tons per year of waste to the facility. But here's the interesting part. It's a concept to process solid waste without recycle MSW without source separation. Now, Kevin's ecomaine system has MSW collected separately from the recyclables, and they go to different facilities. And that's a very efficient way, and they run a nice system down there. They're relying on generators to do the sorting. Up in central Maine, we've got a lot longer distances between our communities, a little different set of economics, certainly a different population density. And the approach that the MRC sponsored and that the coastal facility was set up to implement is to collect MSW and recyclables together. No sorting, no separate collection, no separate hauling, just central processing. That's what's new and different. Let's look at it a little bit more closely. This is my rendering of the process, and hopefully it's in a big enough conceptual view and a big enough font that you can see what's going on. The facility has two main pieces, a front end and a back end. The front end essentially replaces curbside sorting of conventional recyclables. And you've got trommels and screens and magnets and sorters, et cetera, and a baler. And you're pulling out that cardboard, all those Amazon packages, the plastics, 1s, 2s, 3 to 7s, and mixed rigids, metal containers. 3 common recyclers you don't see on the list. Mixed paper, that goes to the back end, and it goes through a proprietary fibrite process to create cellulose pulp, with the goal of using it either in paper making or, if need be, as a displacement for biomass fuel for electricity. Film plastics. Through a briquetter, you can make an engineered fuel that, for example, can displace alternative fuels at a cement kiln. And fines processing with anaerobic digestion. You get the soluble organics being digested to biogas. The fines themselves can be upgraded to aggregate at some point. Right now, they're being used at alternative daily cover. And just to reinforce one of Tony King's points before, I've shown in yellow very clearly where material from the system goes to the landfill. The facility's shut down, there's bypass. Some things that come in and can't be processed, be it snow fence or Christmas tree light strings or other things like that, our non-processables get picked out and something else has to happen to them. And then the process itself generates residuals. The goal here was to get to 80% diversion and only 20% the landfill, and then over time to increase diversion as much as it could be increased. So that's the facility. You may think, is this the only one of its type? Well, in fact, at this point, there are 6 mixed MSW processing facilities on the east coast of the US and certain others on the west coast. This is a trend, a quiet trend, as an alternative to landfill and waste to energy that maybe you may not know as much about. If you look at the 3 in the southeast, Alabama, South Carolina, West Virginia, they're making densified fuel for cement kilns and solid waste boilers. A lot of coal in that part of the US, and this is displacing coal, and this is one way that's starting to happen. Sustained Technologies in Chester, Nova Scotia, also is making a densified fuel product. They also have a molecule for converting mixed plastics to a synthetic diesel product, so that home heating fuel or marine diesel can come out of waste plastic. Very interesting new process that's also starting to get legs across the country. Zero Waste Solutions in Rochester, Mass. does not have a back end, it just has the front end. Fiberite is perhaps the most ambitious. And as I said, turning the mixed paper into pulp for paper biomass, the briquettes from plastic fuel to cement kiln, and biogas as renewable pipeline gas. Okay, so that's the intent. What are the plus and minuses of doing it? Well, I think if you could recover recyclables from mixed waste, that could be disruptive. More recovery, lower cost, less work by generators, less collection cost, fewer trucks on the road, making other products from the low value recyclables, which are the mixed waste, the mixed plastic, and the glass, and the organic bound up in them. If you can make pulp and briquettes and biogas and have higher value, now you're starting to see the appeal of a mixed waste processing facility. And what are the cons? And let's acknowledge them right up front. First of all, there's a record of facilities using overseas waste technology not doing well or failing in the US. The skeptics have a point, and one of the points is it's too complicated. Simple can be better. I'm going to address and say that there's nothing simpler than digging a hole in the ground and throwing waste in and covering it up. If we want better, we can't be afraid of complexity. We can't be afraid of taking risks. We have to take risks and look at complexity if we want to do better than that. The second is more an idea of philosophy, the idea that generators need to know what's in their waste stream. And in fact, some would say that managing waste should be hard. It should be difficult, and that way people have more of an incentive for waste reduction and to control their waste if they see and are confronted with how hard it is to manage. So the bottom line here, and the pros and cons, you've got an enormous potential in a new facility, some challenges and attitudes to overcome. I think this is a fundamental question, so I'm going to state it as dramatically as I can, and hopefully you'll see my point. Here it goes. To source separate or not to source separate? That is the question. Whether it is better for sorting to rely on automation or the public at large. And there are two attitudes out there. Is this a disruptive technology that's going to change the nature of solid waste management over the next 50 years and the next generation? Or is it a fool's errand that's not going to work? Okay, I'm out there. Enough speculation and theorizing. Let's look at the facts. Okay, first fact. The facility was originally intended to go commercial on April 1st, 2018. Lots of reasons that didn't happen, but there was a performance test on October 22nd and 28th, 2019 that I witnessed. And here's what we learned when we watched the facility operate under test conditions. First of all, the processing capacity was there. It did 400 tons a day. It did more than that. It processed up to 53 tons an hour in a 3-hour stretch and met that standard. And when we did the mass balance on the facility, it diverted about 54%, which beat the 50% number. And this is before implementation of some of the upgrades down the road that are intended to get it up to 80%. So the test shows still tremendous potential. All the recovered materials from the front end were sold. Those of you who say you'll never sell or make quality recyclables from a mixed waste processing facility, they were made, they were sold. Quality pulp, quality briquettes, more biogas than anticipated, and alternative daily cover that met the standards and was used for daily cover at Crossroads Landfill. All encouraging results. And just some pictures of the materials, some HDPE plastic, some cardboard bales, pulp, a gas which is being flared or was being flared, briquettes to go to the cement kiln. And finally, if you have an operation with manual sorting of materials at the front end, you can pull out American flags and give them a proper burial, which is something that happened around July 4th and Memorial Day. Okay, let's be honest. What are the challenges? What happened? Number of challenges I want to specifically address. First of all, there's funky stuff in waste. Tanglers, tarps, bulkies. There are bottlenecks in the facility. There are places where the facility went airborne and shouldn't. There were issues with the recovery of all the film plastics. And if you don't get the film plastic out where it should be gotten out, it clogs up the back end, which could not keep up with the front end. These are issues that you don't know until you turn it on and run it, and many of them can be addressed with design changes. So there's still encouragement here. We've done real work, run the facility, and we understand what the issues are from a real operation. There are challenges, and they can be addressed. But one of the issues here, and I think Kevin actually said it very well, that when he talked about leadership and execution and money, and I'm going to talk about money, because while you're fixing the facility, if those products that are supposed to bring in revenue become disposal costs, you've got a significant negative cash flow. More about that in a minute, but there's one other issue I want to address head on. Let's talk about permitting. And first, I want to start this with a public acknowledgement and thank you to David Burns and his people in the Maine DP Solid Waste Division. This is a first of its kind facility in Maine and not a lot out there in the United States. That's a lot of regulatory challenge and issue. They stuck with it. They did a heck of a job. No, we didn't always agree, but that's how that process worked. Thank you, David. Thank you for your team at DP for your service on this project. We know what's involved. We know how hard this is, and we appreciate the attention that we've gotten over time. So let's talk about beneficial use licensing for the pulp and the briquettes. Coastal applied in June 2019, and the license was issued 11 months later in May 2020. I think there's a fundamental question here that I want to highlight out. Zero waste versus zero risk. If we really want that circular economy, we want to do everything we can to encourage waste to be converted to products and to be out in the marketplace. We want to make sure that can happen, that the licensing process is smooth, and that we encourage the process so that less waste becomes landfill material and more waste becomes products. On the other hand, there's a tension here. If we want maximum protection of public health and the environment to achieve zero risk, then we need to regulate products from waste very closely. And that makes it hard to achieve zero waste. Zero waste, zero risk, it's a balance. And think about it. Sampling and analysis work plan. How much sampling is enough to protect the people? How much analysis to what standard? Open, difficult questions. What does beneficial use mean? What is positive value to the receiving facility? And who determines that? Should it be the DP or the customer that wants the product? Difficult, complicated question. And finally, in Maine, the DP determined that the receiving facilities require appropriate licenses. So there are 2 licenses required. One for the Coastal Hamden facility, one for the buyer. That adds a step to the process. Do we want to make this an easy process to encourage zero waste? Or are we looking more at protection and zero risk? Trade-off. Bottom line here, and I'm not making any value judgment on the trade-off, I'm just putting the issue out there because I think it's fundamental to one of the things we've learned here. Bottom line, Coastal was not allowed to sell pulp and briquettes in Maine until the license was issued and the conditions satisfied, which meant from June 9, 2019, they were producing materials they couldn't sell ahead of the central landfill. That's called a cash flow drain. So let's talk about what happened in that context. The performance tests I showed you in October 2019, there was a conditional pass because some of the conditions under which the numbers were achieved, we wanted to see them do better, but commercial operation began. Coastal developed a plan to address the issues and the conditions and to upgrade the facility to profitability. There were 3 parts: an interim loan, the bridge loan, and a long-term financing plan. The interim loan was a 3-month period, and the MRC came up and provided the interim loan in February 2020 with the closing date scheduled for April 2020. All we had to do was get through March 2020 as anticipated. Anybody remember March 2020? Nobody will ever forget March 2020. COVID-19 went viral and meant new safety costs. Recycling markets took another turn down. The pulp purchasers who were lined up and had taken samples of the pulp for testing had other priorities in the age of COVID. And I don't even need to start to talk about the financial markets. Try closing a finance deal in the middle of the start of a pandemic. The bridge loan fell through. Coastal ran out of cash, and the facility, I won't use the word close, the facility suspended operations. So where does that leave us now? Well, When the facility suspended operation, the MRC as co-permittee stepped in and helped secure the facility. As Tony mentioned, MSCW has to be bypassed to the Crossroads landfill, some initially to Juniper Ridge and now Perk, and that's an interesting topic of its own. And now we ask the question, can we find investment? It turns out there's a whole body of investors who specialize in distressed assets. The MRC and the word went out, and we looked at the market for both strategic and financial investors. We received several letters of interest. Meanwhile, the bondholders appointed a receiver for oversight of the facility. Receivership is not bankruptcy, it's different. It's at the state and not the federal level, etc. Maybe Jim can explain that later if someone asks. All parties are working to find a reinvestment proposal. And I will say this, as of last Friday, a certain number of second round proposals were received. I can't tell you what's in them. I can say I am encouraged. There is a path. There may be a way to do this. And that's the question that I'm going to throw out there. Can the MRC pull it off? Can Coastal get an investor to provide capital, come out of receivership, restart the facility, and operate successfully? And if that happens, will it take off? Will it become disruptive technology? And what if it doesn't? We have to be prepared for everything. So my answer to that one is, if you want to know what happens if it doesn't, keep coming to E2Tech seminars, and maybe the next presentation will tell you everything you're waiting to hear. And until then, I hope you like roller coaster rides, because we're certainly getting used to them. Thank you very much to everyone, to E2Tech for letting me speak, for the MRC to trusting me to speak, and for all of you who are listening. And I hope I've raised some issues that we can discuss and think about for a long time. Thank you very much.
George, thank you for that presentation. And next, we'll hear from David Biederman to talk about a national perspective and his thoughts on Maine, having heard all of this morning. David?
Good morning, everybody. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, looks great.
Fantastic. So my name is David Biederman. I'm the Executive Director and CEO for SWANA, the Solid Waste Association of North America. I want to thank E2Tech for the opportunity to speak to all of you today and provide a little bit of a national perspective on what's happening in the roller coaster that is the waste and recycling industry from a national perspective. And I really enjoyed the presentations that I heard earlier this morning, because I think many of the challenges that people in Maine, companies in Maine, local governments in Maine are having are ones that are shared nationwide. So you're not going through it alone, I think is an important thing to be aware of. One moment as I try to advance my slides.
They look great, David, and I know Zoom does make that tough. Sometimes down in the lower left, there's kind of a little transparent thing that has you advance them. And I want to encourage participants. The questions have been really great, and I can see there are some wonderful ones in there. And Jim will be picking those and moderating. You know, a really compelling discussion. So keep those coming.
Okay, one second. Let me do that again.
It's looking great, David. And I will say one other thing, which is that the program committee was pleased to have David with his national perspective join us. And we frankly intentionally did put David last so that he could kind of hear and summarize all of the main issues and give that national perspective, including a pandemic perspective.
Adelaide, are you able to advance my slides for me? You're on mute.
If you want to, we can certainly put your presentation up, David, if you would like to stop sharing and then proceed with your remarks. And
I think that would be great. And I apologize for that, because obviously this worked an hour ago. So.
It's okay. You know, I'll proceed with my joke from previously. So when you want a slide advanced, you have to say some recycling industry lingo, like single stream or curbside.
So let me briefly just summarize what SWANA is while we're waiting for my slides to get pulled up, because I don't see them at the moment. Here we go. So if you go to the second slide, SWANA is the National Association for the Waste and Recycling Industry. We People are members of SWANA, not companies, not local governments, not consulting companies, but people who work for all three of those types of entities. We've got more than 10,000 members all across the United States in 47 chapters, including a chapter in northern New England, which consists of our the great states of Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And Kevin Roche from ecomaine, who you heard from earlier, is the chair of our Northern Maine chapter, does a terrific job for our members in Northern New England. And I had the good fortune of coming up to Portland and speaking at ecomaine, I believe last spring, and met a number of state legislators, people from the community, and that was really, really a terrific opportunity for me. SWANA is also the representative to the International Solid Waste Association. So we have relationships all over the globe that allow us to see what's happening in Europe, that allow us to learn about technological advances in other places, and then bring them to the United States. Education is really a key component of what SWANA is all about. And that's why I'm pleased to present today, because we don't just speak at our own events. We want to educate other stakeholders in the waste and recycling space. Next slide, please. I don't have anything creative to say there. So just a brief view of what the solid waste universe looks like throughout the United States. So in the United States, as was said earlier, we still put the majority of our solid waste into landfills. About 52.5% of the 270 million tons of MSW generated each year goes to landfill. You'll notice on the lower right-hand corner of that pie chart, only about 12.5% go to waste to energy, which makes Maine somewhat unusual because it sends a significantly larger component of its material, of waste material, to waste to energy. One of the highest percentages, in fact, in the United States. You often see the recycling rate referred to as being about 33 or 35%. That actually combines two components. What we think of as recycling is about 25, 26%. That's the metal, the bottles, the glass, the paper, but also composting. So the yard waste, the yard trimmings, the branches and things like that make up about 9% of the overall waste stream. And when you combine those two streams, that is what results in the often heard statement that the recycling rate in the United States is about 35%. So if we look at the next slide, what we'll see is that while our recycling rate dramatically increased in the 1980s, 1990s, and you know, it was triggered in part by the garbage barge that Kevin mentioned earlier, we've seen recycling level off in the past decade. This started to happen because newspaper began to go away, because we all got iPhones that replaced, you know, 20 different things that we had in our house. Lightweighting of plastic and metal particularly as plastic bottles got thinner. So we had already seen recycling start to level off, and then something called National Sword happened 3 years ago. And let me just briefly mention National Sword because before COVID, it was the most important issue that SWANA was working on. So if we look at the next slide, National Sword, as I think many of you know, is a program by China to reduce the amount of imports of scrap and recyclables being received into that country. Before National Sword, the United States exported about 1/3 of all the scrap and recyclables that we collect in the United States, about 17 million tons, and particularly the West Coast of the United States, but also, you know, the Northeast to some extent was dependent on China. A lot of material went there. And if you look at the chart below, you'll see the value of that material has been decreasing. And in 2018, the year that I have the most recent data on, the value of that material is about half of what it was in 2015. So when the value of the material goes down, that has an impact on the business model for recycling. Next slide. So the impact was immediate. It disrupted recycling programs throughout the United States. And by one industry count, more than 100 curbside programs were suspended at one point or another. Many of these curbside programs were in smaller communities that are far from markets. We're not talking about large cities suspending curbside, but it is true that in a variety of locations throughout the United States, Local programs were suspended. Many of those have been restored. If you're interested in seeing a list, there's an organization called Waste Dive. It's one of the trade publications that follows our industry. They keep a list on their website of different municipalities that have suspended curbside programs organized by state. And it's a good resource for knowing what's happening. And I would encourage those of you interested in seeing which communities in Maine have suspended to take a look at that. So if you go to the next slide, there's been some responses, positive responses here in the United States to National Sword. As was mentioned earlier, we've seen a lot of investment in new domestic facilities in the United States. Capital sees an opportunity to make money in the United States off the material that was going to China. And so there are about 20 facilities that are in some state of construction or permitting for paper in either the United States, Canada, or Mexico. And there's about a dozen plastic facilities, a dozen facilities interested in receiving recovered plastic. It's going to take time for these facilities to come online, however. In the meantime, local governments either eliminated or suspended curbside. They cut back on the curbside. What I mean by cut back is some communities decided to no longer accept mixed plastics. They would only accept 1s and 2s in curbside programs because those are the materials that had the most value. And some bolder local governments increased their rates because when the value of the commodity going out the back door is worth less than half of what it was 3 years ago, the business model doesn't work, and increasing costs by $1 or $2 a month per household is a way to right-size that. There's been a great emphasis on reducing contamination. One of the big problems with recycling is that Americans aren't very good at it. We put everything in the blue bin thinking, the garbage guys will take care of that. And they put Christmas lights in, and batteries, and plastic bags, and bowling balls, and ammunition, and everything else you can think of. And there's been a lot of emphasis on reducing contamination. This small company that some of you may have heard of called Waste Management issued a report earlier this month. They've seen their contamination rate go from about 25% to about 18% over the last 3 years. That's a very significant reduction and parallels what we're seeing in the communities around the country. So there's some hope about reducing contamination, which makes recycling more cost effective. Some communities are renegotiating their recycling contracts. They have contracts with private companies. The private companies used to make a lot of money off the commodity. They're not making that much money on the commodity anymore, and their costs are increasing because they have to spend more time pulling out contamination to prepare material for market, or, as you see on the next bullet, a lot of recycling facilities are investing in new equipment. There's a lot of robots and artificial intelligence and other equipment going into MRFs to make those facilities operate more effectively. Those things aren't cheap. And so for the business model for recycling to work, we have to realize, as someone said earlier, recycling isn't free. We're also supported by the consumer brand companies, Coca-Cola, Nestle's, Procter & Gamble, who are making commitments to use recycled content in their material. This creates demand for plastic and paper in particular, and creates some pull in the process where we have the opportunity to sell that material to more and more markets. And then finally, from a policy perspective, I'm going to speak about this in a touch more detail. We're seeing a lot of interest here in Washington, D.C. from both Congress and EPA in supporting recycling. So if you go to the next slide. So that was what was going on over the last 2 years. And my charge to all of you is, if you're not part of the America Recycles Network established by EPA in 2018, I would encourage you to become part of it. SWANA was one of the charter signatories to the EPA pledge in 2019 on America Recycles Day, where the industry got together and pledged to support recycling. Last year in November on America Recycles Day, we held a summit with EPA in Washington. And this year, in 2 months, I think 2 months from tomorrow, EPA will be holding its 2020 summit and will be issuing a national strategy and goals for recycling. This is very important work that they're doing. And SWANA has played an important role in supporting EPA and providing input into the development of both the national strategy and the goals. Next slide. So as Maine goes, so goes the nation. When the COVID pandemic hit, we saw residential waste go up significantly. Nationally, went up between 20 and 25%. This resulted in some local governments being forced to suspend certain curbside programs because they needed to collect that trash. So recycling programs, again, curbside recycling programs, curbside bulky waste programs, some of those got suspended because of the need to pick up the 20 to 25% increase in residential waste. Right now, we're probably in the 5 to 10% increase category, similar to what was shown by Kevin earlier, that we've seen residential waste normalize to some extent, but not go all the way back to where it was. And similarly, commercial waste was down very significantly early in March and April. New York City saw its commercial waste go down by more than 50%, and in Manhattan, commercial waste declined by 90%. As you might imagine, we saw a lot of haulers park their trucks and furlough workers as a result. As the pandemic has shifted, we've seen the combination of increased residential waste and increased staffing shortages because people are getting more exposed to COVID-19 or someone in their family is exposed to COVID-19. Garbage has become or has continued to be a big news story in certain major cities. If you go to the next slide, I think we have a couple pictures there for you of, pictures that were in newspaper articles over the last 3 weeks from Philadelphia and Baltimore about, garbage on the street, what's going on, how are we going to solve this problem. It's never popular politically for there to be waste on the street, and there's environmental and public health issues associated with that. Next slide. And this is, of course, on top of the absolute horrendous plague of PPE litter that we saw during the early part of the pandemic when people were wearing gloves wherever they went, and when they were finished using their gloves, they threw them on the street. They left them in the parking lot. And SWANA was forced to issue a press release along with Keep America Beautiful, reminding people that this stuff doesn't belong on the ground, it belongs in a garbage can. And we need a substantial reduction in PPE litter. Although I don't think SWANA deserves the credit for that, we're just glad that people have gotten the message about where the material goes. Next slide. So part of our COVID response was reaching out to the federal government to remind the government that we're essential workers, that the industry really needs to be maintained as essential. And we were successful at getting FEMA and the federal government to identify us as such. The governor of Maryland, who is Larry Hogan, who runs the National Governors Association, actually sent us a very kind letter, unsolicited, thanking SWANA and the industry for its work during the pandemic. Garbage is somewhat of a routine kind of business. You do the same thing every day. You pick it up, you process it, you divert as much as you can, and then you place certain material in an incinerator or in a landfill. And we saw very dynamic things happening in the spring that were disruptive, but fortunately, almost without exception, we've been able to collect the material and manage it properly and on time. A couple more slides, and then I'll throw it back to E2Tech. A couple of things that we did that we're very proud of, actually. FEMA came to us and asked us to help them distribute masks to the solid waste industry and local governments. And so we created a program where people could enter their information on our website, and we, after a certain time, forwarded that over to the federal government, and 2 million masks have been distributed nationwide to folks in the industry and local governments, including about 17,000 masks in the state of Maine. And we were approached by the company that makes those ubiquitous garbage bags, GLAD, to establish a sanitation workers support fund. GLAD wants to give back to the industry, the people who are doing this essential work during a pandemic. And they funded this fund where we are providing money to frontline workers who have tested positive for COVID or were laid off. Or in a couple of instances, a frontline worker who passed away, we can provide a little bit of money to the immediate family. These are opportunities for us as SWANA to give back to the industry and to help the industry be protected and recognized during this very, very challenging time. There's more information about the Sanitation Workers Support Fund on our website. It's currently active. And so if someone working for a local government or a company such as Casella is a frontline worker and is tested positive for COVID, they're eligible for financial payment from SWANA. Next slide. The final thing I want to just briefly mention is there was a time before COVID that we now refer to as BC. And we believe that many of the issues that we were focusing on in the before times are going to soon return to the front burner. The first one is recycling. I mentioned recycling during my presentation because it's already on our plate. One of the speakers mentioned that on January 1st, China is likely to no longer accept any unprocessed scrap material, which is going to be the final national sword obstacle. SWANA is holding actually a recycling summit on November 18th and 19th for those of you who are interested in doing a deeper dive into the recycling issue. EPA has national goals out for comment on their website. Again, national recycling goals. And we expect legislation that's in front of Congress about providing money to local governments and others to support recycling to get some action next year in 2021. So we are taking the opportunity to educate members of Congress and others about the need for that. PFAS was briefly mentioned. This is a very high profile issue about the potential dangers of certain chemicals that are in landfill leachate. This has become a hot topic in New England and nationally, and SWANA is engaged on the issue, and I suspect that we will continue to be engaged in that issue in the future. Worker safety is a high-profile issue in our industry. Collecting garbage is the 5th most dangerous job in the United States. SWANA is the industry leader in providing resources and information to protect solid waste workers and third parties. And we'll continue to do that. And if you're interested in safety issues, we have several pages of content on our website. The issue that was a top of mind issue before COVID that I think is likely to be as top of mind is recruiting and retaining workers. We have difficulty getting people to work in the garbage business. This was a bigger problem when the unemployment rate was 3.5%. I have a suspicion that in a recession, when the unemployment rate is officially 8%, but probably a bit higher than that, we will not have as much difficulty recruiting workers. Of course, retaining workers is a different issue. And what we need to do as an industry is continue to provide opportunities for professional growth while making sure that people are respected and that we make sure that their health and safety is maintained at all times. Again, I want to thank E2Tech for inviting me to participate and provide a national perspective here today, and I look forward to questions.
David, thank you for those comments. Appreciate hearing from a national perspective how Maine's faring, and it seems there's a similarity there as well, so thank you. I apologize for what I think was the former bad audio. I hope things are improving. Trying our best here. There was one question that came up that I think I can answer, and that is there going to be some way to see the presentations or the slideshows after? And the answer is yes. Those will be posted on E2Tech's website, e2tech.org. So please be looking for those. They'll be posted afterwards, and we hope you do take a look and look at those in depth. We have some questions that for each speaker or for particular speakers. Now, I'll start with those in order of your presentation, and then we'll have some jump balls that people can just see, you know, who wants to dive in and try for that. First question goes to Kevin, and it's really a couple of questions mixed together, but it's with regard to composting. What have you learned from EcoMaine's compost collection pilot program, and from that, what's the greatest obstacle to getting households to participate, and how do we overcome that? Kevin?
Sure. So, you know, we're very interested because food waste makes up such a large component of the solid waste stream. And so we're very interested in recycling or recovering that material. We began a program several years ago now that, you know, has been quite successful and is almost kind of in a maintenance mode at this point, where we take food waste in bags as a way to contain the food waste, because that was very important. Somehow you had to contain the food waste in order to move the food waste from whether it's a grocery store or a cafeteria, and then transport it to the end market. And so we're a consolidation point for food waste. Smaller loads are dumped at our facility, and we have a partnership with Exeter Biofuels that takes that material in their digesters. And that has worked quite well. It's predominantly used, though, by the commercial sector. These are grocery stores, these are cafeteria, food processors, those types. We have had some residential pilot programs out there. There are still programs out there. I think the biggest challenge is the expense. Oftentimes it's a separate pickup. How many trucks can you have go by everybody's curbside every single week? And that's the challenge that has to be overcome. We've got to get it to one pass per household per week. The minute you start adding 2 and 3 passes, it becomes extremely expensive, and it has a negative environmental footprint as well. So we got to get over that. And what I see is somehow it's got to be incorporated into one of those 2 waste streams and then removed at the plant.
Very good. Anyone else want to chime in on that one? Okay. Tony, a question for you. Has Casella looked at using electric vehicles and looked at advantages, disadvantages of incorporating an electric fleet into your work?
Yeah, we have. We're finding, obviously it's great for Kevin's 2 trucks that drive from South Portland to his landfill in Scarborough. It's a relatively short trip, and they don't make any stops along the way except to at the landfill location and then on the way back. But we have discovered issues with, the functionality of the services we provide, and electric vehicles, electric trucks. They just don't have enough power and range for the work that we do at the moment. And we're hoping that that can get resolved in a new generation of vehicles. We do have alternative fuel targets for 2030, and at the moment we've got about 3 dozen natural gas run vehicles that are currently out on the road. That has its challenges as well, because you need to have natural gas fueling stations, obviously, and they're not always readily available. But, we are seeking every day to try to reduce our emissions footprint.
Very good. For George, when MRC, when Coastal Maine was operating, what did it generate more of, alternative daily cover or marketable recycling, is a question from the audience.
Okay, and then the answer is that, yeah, there was significant alternative daily cover, and this is one of the reasons we put conditions on the performance test, because precisely that we don't see alternative daily cover as a long-term product with particular value. And some of that, by the way, was pulp and or briquettes that could not be marketed because a beneficial use license was not in hand yet, and some of it was material that had to be bypassed or bypass the back end because the back end couldn't keep up with the front end. So if you actually do fixes to the facility, you can address both those issues. So again, I think, yes, there's more ABC than we wanted, agreed. On the other hand, if you're looking at a first of its type facility in its first commercial operation, you're going to look at issues that are going to require some significant investment, and these are part of the reinvestment plan that we're looking at when the facility is reopened. So I think, let's acknowledge, yeah, it's an issue, and we hope that they see it addressed soon.
One collateral question is, what incentive does Fiber-Right give towns to recycle? And I suspect part of that is whatever is recycled by Fiber-Right will also be allocated to the towns toward their recycling targets. Is that correct?
Yeah, one of the two pieces, but I think there's an even more fundamental piece that I want to address, which is that the conventional waste energy facility or processing facility has been financed on the basis of delivery guarantees town by town. If town X doesn't deliver 2,000 tons a year, then they're penalized. And we've all seen that that can be a disincentive because the town has to make their minimum. When we redid the contracts in 2016, we did not want that structure to be part of what we were having going forward. So we did a couple things to change it. First of all, something we implemented before is that all the towns are pooled. So no individual town has a minimum. They have a target, but if one town is over in waste because it's growing and another town is under, maybe its paper mill shut down, you pull from all the towns in the region to look at the total delivery guarantee so that it takes away the disincentives and issues for individual towns. The second part here is it's always a question of what is town waste and what is commercial waste that comes in under a different account. And so when we set up the guarantee structure, we set it up so that commercial waste counts towards the municipal guarantee. So if a town recycles and reduces its waste by 50%, and that makes more room in the plant to bring in more waste that would otherwise go to landfill, then that is an incentive, and the towns would share through the rebate system the financial value of that. So it's a little bit indirect, but basically what we've done is turn the conventional financing structure upside down to try to include in it incentives to encourage recycling and waste reduction.
Great. Recycling generated a great number of questions here, and apparently there was a program on NPR recently talking about what's really happening with regard to plastic recycling. David, from a national perspective, when we put our milk jugs and whatever else out into the recycling bin, is that material really being recycled, or is that being landfilled? That's the question.
So the answer to that question is simple. The answer is both. Some of that material is recycled and some of it there is no market for. It depends on the type of plastic, and it also depends on where you are geographically, because there are stronger markets in some places than others. The milk jugs, the water bottles, those are the ones and the twos, PET and HDPE. There are very strong markets for that material, and if that material is clean and dry and placed in a blue bin, and in particular when it's in bottle bill states, that material is going to get recycled. There's also an increasing amount of demand for FIVEs, polypropylene, which is an interesting new dynamic. From my perspective, it's new in the industry. But other types of plastic material are often not recyclable in curbside. Nobody should be putting plastic bags in curbside recycling. They're not recyclable at curbside. They get stuck on the screens. They force the operators of the MRF to shut down their facilities. We actually were contacted for that NPR story, and it's true that less than 10% of the plastic generated in the United States is recycled, and that's abysmal. That is abysmal. The capture rate from residential recycling for plastic bottles and other types of plastic containers is between 33 and 50%. We still throw away too much recoverable, recyclable plastic in the trash. One of the things that is on the horizon that might help us with plastic recycling is the concept of what's called chemical recycling or advanced recycling. The large petrochemical companies are making investments in infrastructure to take back that mixed plastic that doesn't have a market and depolymerize it and turn it into new polymers and new monomers that it will then use to make new material. There's some questions about whether this is truly recycling or not. It sounds a little bit more like reuse, but it would divert material away from landfill and save our disposal capacity for material that really needs to be landfilled, not material that has value.
Yeah, David, thanks for helping to make the case for the coastal approach, because a lot of that plastic that doesn't get source separated can be recovered from a mixed waste processing facility, and that's part of the structure of the Fiberite technology. Also, plastic bags, which should not be source separated, can be pulled off with a vacuum or other system and made into fuel or reused in the Fiberite system. So that's exactly the advantage. But I also want to address the NPR article in another way, which is that article seemed to focus quite a bit on big oil companies and big chemical companies and had a little scent of conspiracy behind it. I guess that's good journalism and it makes for an exciting story. But there is another thread in the world of emerging plastic recycling technology, which is that the tech entrepreneurs are taking this one on as well. And so, for example, Renewology in Chester, Nova Scotia is a new technology that came out of an entrepreneurship competition at MIT. I was involved with a facility which is now operating in the Tingnu district in Yancheng, China, in Yangshu province, which takes cellophane envelopes out of junk mail and converts it to diesel, and it goes straight into the excavators and the bulldozers. It can be done technically to reuse these materials, keep them out of landfills, and basically avoid the need to refine new crude oil to make the plastics. There is technology out there, and there are entrepreneurs and startups who are trying to get these facilities, and I think we'll see a lot of this in the next few years. And these are people who are looking to disrupt the traditional oil companies and to disrupt the traditional chemical companies. So it is an exciting time in this business. And for all the downsides of plastic, if you can reuse it in a meaningful and beneficial way, that takes some of the sting out of the presence of plastics everywhere.
A number
Jim,
of questions.
Jim, if I can add, Jim, I just want to add something to that, George. Actually issuing a report either today or tomorrow analyzing several of these innovative technologies, plastic waste to fuel, Agilex, things like that. And so you may want to keep an eye out for that.
All right. There was another area of interest with regard to recycling, and that is we're all getting a lot of packages during COVID, during this the past lockdown. We've been mail ordering like crazy. You get cardboard packages, but you also get the packing materials, often plastic or styrofoam or bubble wrap. Or you get these mailers from Amazon and others that are paper on the outside, plastic bubble wrap on the inside. I think there are probably two aspects to it. One, how are we doing for recycling? Any research being done in making those recyclable or more recyclable? And then on the other end, probably the generation end, what policies do we put in place to try to go to more recyclable materials for this packaging? Jump ball. Who would like to try that? Kevin.
We are beginning to see interest and investment in more readily recyclable packaging. Again, I think the consumer is wise to this. And although plastic has its purpose, and that purpose I don't think is going away anytime soon, but when given the choice in certain circumstances, I think there's literature out there that says that the consumer prefers something that they can drop in the recycling bin and not have to wonder whether it gets recyclable or not. So we're looking at fully fiber mailers now that could replace the plastic mailers or the bubble wrap or the Tyvek mailers that you can't even rip apart. And so I think that's going to continue. That involves education, and it involves the consumer making a choice, using their purchasing power to make that choice. But that's going to be very, very slow. And that's why we need policy to move that along. We need policy to nurture that interest so that we don't have to wait 10 or 20 years to get to where we need to go. But the bottom line is, if you can have a package and you can drop it in your recycling bin right at curbside, that's the most convenient option that we have available, and it's the most successful option. We can't have take back. We can't have 100 different take back programs where you're taking back this material to 100 different places. It's never going to go. And those are feel good approaches oftentimes, and sometimes they work with certain materials, but by and large, usually it's the 1 or 2% that persist.
Kevin's absolutely right. We basically have, voluntary programs right now. There's no state in the United States that mandates that packaging be taken back by the people who generate the packaging. And when I say people, I don't mean the individuals, I mean the companies. Companies have done a great job of externalizing the cost of waste disposal on the backs of consumers and often on municipalities. And so what we see right now is an interesting dialogue taking place between the different stakeholders, including Amazon, about how to better manage this waste stream. If those voluntary activities don't result in better outcomes, I would not be surprised if more aggressive federal policy is implemented over the next few years.
Any other comments on what you're doing in the meantime with this type of packaging until industry can change and until policy gets in place to push that change?
Well, it's really difficult to recycle composite materials that are bound up together, and I think that's an issue. And I think that's one of the reasons you've seen the mixed waste processing facilities go to a sort of a fuel product where they don't have to unbundle different species of plastics or different species of paper in order to make the composite fuel product to offset coal or offset fuel in cement kiln. But it's not the best solution. The best solution is to go upstream and unbundle and have packaging made from materials that can, exactly as Kevin said, be recycled on their own without that level of unbundling, and then find a higher and better use for the materials downstream than just offsetting fuel in a cement kiln. But it's a combination package of how to do this going forward, and everything is interactive.
Speaking of composite wastes, it used to be that you could take an appliance and it was, if it was a washing machine or a refrigerator or a stove, it was worn out, it was waste metal, and it would go and be recycled for metal parts. There's a lot of circuitry in those these days now, and you wind up having e-waste being generated as well. How does the industry handle that? Tony? If Casella does Casella do pickup of heavy items like that?
We do. It depends on the contract with the municipality, if we have bulky waste collection day or whatnot. Right. But a lot of our transfer stations will take that material in from either commercial or residential generators. And yeah, it gets very tricky because, you know, you have to watch out for any mercury switches. You have to have a certified freon remover if there's any refrigeration equipment in it. And then, like you said, essentially you have to rip them apart because there's so many different components. So, you know, a refrigerator now is pretty similar to a composite package. And we've had those around for a long time. It's you really have to deconstruct, it's like a depackaging food waste almost. And so everything we handle now is we handle it more frequently. It takes longer to take this material apart, and I think, you know, either George or David said this at the beginning. Maybe it should. Maybe the generators of the waste material should have to take the time to remove all of the unrecyclable materials so that they know the true cost of waste management, because it's becoming more and more and more complicated every day.
And again, Tony, I think I said that right. Design for recycling is an important concept that we need to see in the manufacturing area, so that the nickel cadmium battery isn't buried somewhere where you can't get at it, but you can just open a compartment, pull it out, and then you have a device that doesn't have it, or for that matter, chip removal. And I think, I mean, the other issue comes there is how much, and this has been a theme throughout the program, you need to educate consumers to do this. It needs to come from every source, policy, private providers, public sector, et cetera. And hopefully we will be successful in doing this, because it is a challenge to manage it in a way to remove those, I'll call them difficult to manage items from the conventional waste stream. Nobody wants them in the waste processing, and they have to be handled.
What would be your opinion of an environmental fee of some amount on all goods to pay for the disposal and recycling of packaging in the meantime, until more environmentally friendly packaging could be determined or could be generated?
You know, I think, you know, for me, I prefer to have the focus on the existing infrastructure that's working, that's worked for the last 30 years. It's there, it's available, and it has the capacity to take more. So, you know, with the absence of newspapers, by and large, these recycling programs have the capacity to take more. And not all that many recycling facilities are full at this point. And so I'd like the emphasis to be on steering material toward readily recyclable material that can be placed in community recycling programs. It's really who's going to pay for it, I think, is what your question is. If you want to have the producers pay for it, I have no problem with that. I advocate that, you know, you could get some money from the producers, and you could get some money from the landfill industry. A lot of profit is being earned by landfilling material. I had that slide where dollars are going into the landfill. It's a very profitable industry. I've run 5 different landfills. I know what you can make at running a landfill. And so that's where we need to take some of those dollars and put them into the higher rungs of the hierarchy.
And I would just say, Kevin, that landfilling is already taxed by the state. And so I think you have to look at the state solid waste fund and maybe disperse those funds appropriately.
And I would add that if you're looking at a landfill tax, and this is done in Europe, certainly, that one needs to distinguish between unprocessed waste going in and residual material that's already been through a processing facility to make sure the incentives are going in the right place, so that there is a disincentive to put raw waste into the landfill, but yet that cost does not go back and hit processing facilities in a way that undermines their economics environment.
Great. Well, do we have any, thank you all for your presentations and for your answers to questions today. It's been, I hope it's been enlightening to our audience. Do we have any closing thoughts from each of you as we wind this program down? Kevin?
Sure. My thought is don't give up on recycling. It's been the most successful waste management strategy that we've had over the last 30 years. It's costly right now. I feel it's going to come back, and those investments are being made. So don't give up on recycling and focus on policy, how you can change policy to improve behavior.
Thank you. Tony?
Yeah, I think this has been great. I think if nothing else, people will understand how complicated a sector of government and business solid waste management is that they never thought before. When I first got out of school, I was doing water and wastewater, and the innovations in those industries are astounding. And when I started working in solid waste, I thought, well, there's nothing exciting going on here. But I have to say, in the last 20 years, it's been really exciting. The innovations of this industry. So I hope some of the people listening caught a little piece of that excitement, even with the tension involved. And thanks for having me.
Thank you. George?
Yeah, I just want to agree with my panelists. Don't give up. The story is not over. It's just starting, and there are all sorts of opportunities going forward, be they through technology, be they through public education, be they through new and different ways of doing things. I think, yeah, we're in a roller coaster ride, but we're optimistic we're going to find a way to make the Hamden facility move forward and blaze some new paths. It may be a rocky road, but nobody said this was easy. The reason we have to work so hard is because it's not easy. We have to collaborate and work together on it. Work with the DEP, work with policymakers, work with consumers and waste producers. We can't do this alone, but together we can do great things.
Very good. And David?
Just to repeat a couple things, we need to recycle properly. Part of the stress that we have in recycling is because we're not doing a good job of recycling. So let's make sure we keep things like tanglers, like Christmas lights, plastic, batteries, which can cause fires, out of the recycling stream. That will allow the recycling system to work better. We focused a lot on recycling, but we didn't talk all that much about waste reduction. We should be thinking more about reducing the amount of waste at the same time that we're trying to recycle. And so I ask everybody who's participated in this terrific seminar to think about the waste that they generate and ways that they could generate less waste in the course of their busy lives. And then finally, I agree with what Kevin said about policy. Policy is going to change over the next few years with regards to how waste and recycling is managed. I think we should be mindful that the consumer brand companies want to blame the waste sector for not providing them with enough recyclables to meet their sustainability goals. We need to convince them to invest more in our industry. And if they do, we'll be able to recover more material and send less material for disposal.
Great. Well, thank you all to our speakers today. I appreciate your efforts, your presentations.
So thank you so much for moderating, Jim. What an amazing and dynamic discussion. Very enjoyable. Thank you to our sponsor, CV Mahar, St. Germain, and TRC VHB. E2Tech, please mark your calendars. We have 2 great events coming up. Both of them on Tuesdays in October. On October 6th, we're going to explore equity in energy markets, or the lack thereof. And on the 20th, we're going to explore combined heat and power and what's new in that market. And that's in conjunction with the University of Maine. So we thank you for your participation with E2Tech. We thank all of our panelists. What an amazing group we've had. And I especially would like to thank Adelaide. Adelaide, you've saved the day yet again today with the screen shares, and a great job. Thank you so much. So I will reiterate that the full recording, the slides, and the Q&A will be saved. And I hope as we wrap this webinar that you'll be thinking about source reduction and recycling properly. And I'd like to update everybody. I've had a text from my wife, and we did get our recycling bin out today, this morning here in Biddeford. So thank you again for a wonderful time, a wonderful discussion, and stay tuned, e2tech.org for our combined heat and power and diversity and equity in energy markets coming up in October. And I wish you all a great day. And America Recycles Day is November 15th. And I try hard to participate on that day, and I hope that you all will as well. So thank you again to our panelists and moderator, and we will connect with you again soon. Have a wonderful day.